Now, the first thing we're going to do with this is it's not going to be a tint of black. It's actually going to just be a transparent tint of white. So we'll just make sure that frame is selected, come down here to the swatches, and we can see it's currently filled with 60% black. Let's just be safe and push that up to 100% tint value, and then change it to the paper color, which will now fill it effectively with white. We can then come back down to the transparency palette, and let's change this also to about 50%. Now, we don't have to drag the slider. We can just highlight the value here, key in 50, and say, OK. We can now see quite happily through to the background image. Now, what I'm going to do is fit the page in window so we can see how it looks overall. And like I said earlier on, don't worry that this area is overlapping here at the top and bottom, because this is just a transparent white going onto a white background, so it doesn't really matter if this overlaps. If it does bother you though, you can drag this up and snap it into the bottom rule, and also take the top line and do exactly the same. It's not really going to make much difference overall, but if neat and tidy is good, then that's an easy way to do it. Now, the layer blending modes can also affect how this shape actually looks on the image underneath. If we come over here to where it says normal, we can choose any of these and just see if there is a slight shift in color. And you can see that, depending on the opacity value you've applied to the shape, it will change quite drastically or sometimes hardly at all. But you can see there are different results for every single one of these that you choose. Now, what I'm going to do is settle on one called Overlay. That's a fairly good one to use when you have a bright colored shape that's being tinted onto the background. It tends to bring more of the original color through rather than just fading it out using a tint of white. So Overlay in this case at 50%, if we deselect that, is now doing a nice job of revealing the background. And you'll see it's also adjusting the contrast and brightness down here of this part of the grass. So it's just quite a nice blending mode to use. Now, that's finished that side of our page. The table of contents we'll deal with later on. Let's jump across to our photography page next. Remember, that's on page 5. Double click to go there. In the background over here, we have the large photography title, which, if you remember, is placed inside a frame that was filled with a tint of black. If we select this background frame, and do remember, very importantly here, we're using the main selection tool at all times right now. If we were to get the direct selection tool by hitting the A key, clicking back on the image itself, if we came down to the swatches palette, it's going to show us that there is no color attribute here. That's because we can't change the actual color of the placed Illustrator file. But if we go back to the main selection tool, once again, click back to select the frame, we can see this is where it tells us it's filled with 60% black. Now, what we want to do is replace this black with our spot silver color that we generated earlier on. That's down here in our list. We simply have to click on that to apply it. And what you'll notice is, as well as applying the silver effect to the main background, it also affects the white tint that we saw here, which was initially a tint of gray, is now also a tint of silver because it's inside the same object. You change the color of the object, the tint value updates as well. So this is actually a very efficient way to mix tints and solid values of one color simply by placing one inside the other. Now, it's at 60%, which is maybe a little too light. I actually want to push that all the way up to 100%, so that silver is nice and strong in the background. If you do feel now that you wanted to change the opacity of the photography title, you could go back to the direct selection tool, click on the graphic again inside of the frame, come down to the transparency palette. Whatever we change it to here, say 25 in this case, will now update to a 25% tint of silver because it's white on whatever color the crop frame actually contains. So again, a great way of mixing two types of color here.